Thank you very much, John. So I want to talk about how healthcare operates in a unique space, a sacred space is what I call it. Many moons ago, between our first and second child, we suffered a miscarriage, which a lot of people do. And I remember talking to a friend of ours about this, and she shared her experience and said, let me tell you what happened to me. I went to had the miscarriage, went to the A&E to have my D&C, and while I was there, the doctor came in, it happened to be the registrar, and asked a few questions, and then asked me to sign a form. And she said, I asked, what am I signing? And her words, he sort of fluffed around a bit and said, look, we just really need you to sign this so we can carry on with the procedure. And, you know, she wasn't obviously in a good state of mind, so she sort of pressed him a bit more, and he might have come off a fairly long shift. So it wasn't a good mix. And eventually, to placate her, he said, look, it's just an EPC form, and all we need is your signature. And she said, what does EPC stand for? And he said, madam, we want to extract the products of your conception. And she nearly fell over and thought, that's my baby he's talking about. And she was devastated. Fortunately, about 10 minutes later, the consultant came in the room. He knelt down beside her. He looked her in the eye and he said, you know, Marjorie, I'm terribly sorry this has happened to you. I really can't imagine what it would be like, he's a male, to have a miscarriage. I just want to reassure you that, you know, I'm here for you and to help you. And she said, you know what, Mike, it metaphorically picked me up off the floor again. In a matter of, 10 or 15 minutes, I felt reconnected. And she said, and you know what, Mike, the registrar did nothing wrong, technically. Had a job to do to get it done. But it left me feeling horrible. I can't describe to you about this. And I said, when did this happen? She goes, 20 years ago. It was as real to her then as it was 20 years ago. And I said, look, if I was to share this talk, your story, what would be 2 words that summed it up? She says, well, the registrar's encounter was a transaction. It was transactional. Sign this, get that done, ask questions, bang, bang, bang. But what the consultant did was reconnected with me, and that was more interactional. And so that sort of transaction-interaction concept, I think, is really important in healthcare. And it wasn't hiding behind the science of medicine. Now, I think healthcare is also unique because we work on the edge of the human predicament. You're going to hear more about that because we work with people confronted with suffering and asking questions about meaning. Why me? Why am I sick? Will things get better? How will my life be different now? These are at the core of human suffering and what it means to be human. And we deal with that suffering in many forms: physical, emotional, social, spiritual. It's part of our human condition. We are shaped by it, and we need to be shaped by it. But I'm not a romanticist. My wife will tell you that. Suffering is unkind, unfair, unjust, and often untimely. But it's what we live with. It's what we live with. So suffering, if we allow it, helps us get in touch with our own humanity and our core values. So let's what we do shape us, both personally and professionally. What I'd like to do now, and I hope it works, is share with you a clip on YouTube by Dr. Kieran Sweeney. Kieran, when I first went to the UK in 1999, I worked with Kieran for about 5 years. And he's a GP. He became Professor of General Practice. a wonderful man, a great colleague, fellow golfer with me, and unfortunately Kieran passed away in 2009 at Christmas of mesothelioma, which he thinks he got it from working as a doctor in Glasgow, walking from the doctor's quarters to the wards where the asbestos pipes were all peeling away, and he thinks that's where he may have got it. But Kieran passed away at the tender age of 57, leaving 4 children behind, eldest of 15. And Kieran, before he passed away, he spoke with the King's Foundation in the UK about what his experience was like going through the health system when he was diagnosed with his cancer. So we'll just have a quick listen to Kieran. It goes for about 5 or 6 minutes. I hope it works.
The diagnosis was established very quickly after I'd had an X-ray which had shown pleural effusion in my right lung. I'd had some symptoms, a cough, which I thought was a viral infection, for about 8 weeks, but because it persisted, I asked my GP for an X-ray. And at that point, he set up very quickly an appointment with a respiratory physician, who in turn set up an appointment with a cardiothoracic surgeon for a biopsy. And really the whole procedure from being referred to having the biopsy took place over about a week, and I think actually operationally couldn't have happened any more quickly. So technically things went very swiftly and very positively, but it was after I'd had the biopsy, which was again the anaesthetist was round and asked me was I okay, and the third surgeon came round and asked me was I okay after the biopsy. But what was interesting was that they all looked very, very despondent about their findings. Their findings were on a video-assisted thoracoscopy, so everyone could see my chest, which looked terrible, looking at the reports. And increasingly, I became aware of their despondency. So I got more frightened, really, as that period went on. And I remember the SHO coming into the room. He'd been an undergraduate student with me for a year or two. I knew him very well. I could tell that he was very, very upset and wanted to talk to me about it. But I think he felt that he didn't have the authority to do that. So I left hospital the next day, still without any clear understanding of what was happening to me, and came home to the kitchen in my house, where I opened the discharge summary, because I have access to my own records obviously, and the discharge summary included the phrase likely malignant mesothelioma, patient aware of diagnosis. So that's how I learned that I had a mesothelioma, reading it at the kitchen table. I think it's important to say at this stage that although that wasn't the right way to learn about it, I think everyone was trying to do the right thing. The first I learned directly that I might have a mesothelioma was from the specialist cancer nurse who came in to show my wife how to drain the pleural catheter, which is in my right chest. And he, again acting very conscientiously, said to me and my wife, if I wanted any information about mesothelioma, he'd lots of it available. There was a point where everyone in the team, including my wife, knew that I had a mesothelioma, and I didn't. And that can't be right. I think there may have been something in the fact that being a doctor, I'm being roughly the same age as these guys. So I'm in my late 50s. Most of the consultants were in their late 50s or 50s, you know. And our kids would be the same age. This is completely cut and just diagnosis. So you can see them thinking, God, this guy's out with. And they just weren't brave enough. They weren't brave enough to say, this is really bad news for you. Maybe that they hid behind the science of their biopsy and pathology to avoid confronting the metaphysics of my predicament. I am a man devoid of hope. And I just sensed that they hesitated at that point. And my own view is, sounds quite hard, is I just don't think that's good enough. Medicine is not solely a technical activity and pursuit. Medicine is about understanding and being with people at the edge of the human predicament. Caring for somebody is a transactional activity where they do things to me. Everything that I've had done to me in our local hospital has been excellent. There has been a single mistake. I'm seen it on time. For things transactionally, I think the place is outstanding. It's the relational care where I felt that the experience has been less than satisfactory, and it's been a mixture of some really shockingly bad interactions and some shockingly good interactions, some surprisingly good interactions. But again, I want to stress that when I perceive people to be interacting poorly with me, I still, and I mean this, I still think they're trying to do their best. I still think they don't think that they're actually upsetting me in a particular way, but they are. And my insight into the experience is it doesn't take much to change from upsetting or insensitive communication to communication that puts someone much more at their ease.
So Kieran's gone to God now, but I think he's left us with a bit of a legacy about we can't hide behind the science, and that medicine is a relational activity, particularly in general practice. And I would stress, and so would Kieran, and we've published quite a bit together, that it's also what we can learn and how we're shaped by the patients that we see, and hearing their stories and letting that sort of shape us and how we practice and become better humans. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you. As an educator, that's something that I want to teach my registrars. And I think a certain amount of reflective learning is what's called by them. Do you have any suggestions on how I can encourage that in my registrars?
Well, role model it. Yep, as I'm sure you do. We run the patient surveys. I think that helps people at least get a bit of an indicator. How am I comparing with other people? I think, that video is just on YouTube. So if you type in Dr. Kieran Sweeney, you get the 12-minute version, which is, that's why I cut it out. That's a 6-minute version. And that video, like for example, at Townsville Hospital, that's being shown to every staff up in Townsville as part of their person-centred care program, I think it's called. But look, that's freely accessible. Just go on the YouTube and grab it. I think having people in front of them. I guess the challenge is when they go back to the workplace, there may not be people with the same values or the same sort of belief about that relational side of things. So it's important that the training environment somehow matches the workplace environment as well. And that's the challenge, I think. I think most people wouldn't disagree with that. It's just seeing how that... And we're all different at it. We all have our own unique styles of relational care. But it is a challenge. I think we have to be, as you said, reflective and reminded about this.
Can I have one more?
Yeah.
I think having ownership of the relationship between you and the patient is helpful. That SHMO
Yes.
speaking to him that wanted to own the relationship but didn't feel he had the place. So one of the things we could do is encourage our registrars to have ownership of their relationship, not just feel like they're a stand-in for somebody else in the practice. it was transformational.
Yeah.
For the next few weeks of my life.
Wonderful. And I think, you know, I don't think we can underestimate the difficulty in that relational care. I mean, for some it comes easy, for others it's a tough gig. Breaking bad news in that case was very difficult for those doctors, as you said, because they're consultants around roughly the same age. Just conscious of time.
Thank you. Just a contribution, and it's in response to her suggestion.
Can you just hold the mic closer?
Yeah, just a contribution here, responding to what the last speaker just said. At times there are patients who just don't want to know what's happening. Often you're going to find most patients would ask you directly what the problem is and what their prognosis might be, given they've got a medical situation which they are consulting for. It's at times challenging to run through the processes and get patients involved. You've got to assess your patient, know what they really want to know. Ask them if they are really keen to know and what their preferences might be. I've seen people who say, don't tell me anything, I don't want to know. I've also seen people who say to me, tell me how long do I have to live? In which case it's not usually, often I would volunteer anything. I could just say it's bad, it would kill you. It's a matter of time.
Yeah.
What could we do to make it better? But it's something we need to keep exploring ways of improving the care we give to people. My experience is we create situations that make people think we would fix every problem. I've actually felt a lot better when I bring the patients to the realization that we can still walk with them to their grave and make them rest in peace. And it's easier to manage patients from there.
Absolutely. And I think one of the key things, and you said quite a few things there is important, is check in with the patient as you're walking with them. That's the most important thing, where they're at. Yeah. Danielle, did you?
Quick one.
Danielle, you and Quick. Yeah, you and Quick.
It might get much quicker.
Here I am in front of the stage. So I remember when I was a medical student, and we had to go and break some bad news, or told a patient about her mother, and it wasn't very good news. And it was very awkward, I remember. And I was lucky, I suppose, because I was a mature age medical student. And no one said anything. It was just like no one was talking about the elephant in the room. And I just stepped forward and I hugged the woman and I said, I'm so sorry. This must be so difficult for you. And, just gave that and just looked her in the eye and said, I'm really sad you're feeling this right now, or whatever I said, but it was pretty good. And, but I could see the registrar kept looking at me, like staring at me. And I was walking around and we were doing ward rounds still. And then she just stopped and she said, how did you know to do that? I made a note to come back and talk to the woman afterwards. But I think a lot of it is around the fear that we have around time management. And if you open a can of worms in a 15-minute doctor appointment, and how do you deal with someone who's crying? But, I was able to facilitate that in a matter of minutes. And that might be, one of the skill set that we need to teach registrars, is that it doesn't necessarily take a long time to be kind and to open your heart to people.
Thanks, Danielle.
That was pretty short.
Yeah, it was very short. Thank you. Good, John.
Okay.